For decades, the tragedy surrounding Heather O'Rourke was spoken about in whispers, as if Hollywood feared what might surface if anyone dug too deeply. But now, a man who grew up inside the industry, Ron Howard, has finally broken his long silence. His words, subtle but sharp, have reopened painful questions about how a 12-year-old girl could rise so quickly, shine so brightly, and then be gone before the world even understood what happened. And what he suggests about Heather's final months has left many wondering whether her death was truly unavoidable or quietly ignored. The girl Hollywood never protected. Before the world knew her as Carol Ann Freeling, the little girl whose voice could freeze an entire generation, Heather O'Rourke was simply a child growing up in San Diego, born on December 27, 1975, to Kathleen and Michael O'Rourke. She lived in a modest home where money was tight, love was plenty, and Hollywood was a distant dream. Her parents divorced in 1981, forcing Kathleen to move Heather and her older sister Tammy into a trailer park in Anaheim. Life was not glamorous, but the family was close, and Heather's future seemed destined to unfold far from cameras and sound stages. Everything changed in 1980 when 5-year-old Heather visited the MGM lot while Tammy was filming Pennies from Heaven. Steven Spielberg, finishing lunch in the studio commissary, spotted the quiet blonde child eating with her mother. He approached the family minutes later, convinced he had found the exact, beatific little girl he needed for his next film, Poltergeist. Heather froze during her first audition, unfamiliar with acting or the intensity of casting rooms, but when Spielberg asked her to scream, just scream, her voice hit the walls with such raw fear and emotion that he hired her on the spot. She beat out Drew Barrymore, who was sent to E.T. instead. By the time Poltergeist premiered in June 1982, Heather was an overnight sensation. Offers poured in, commercials, guest appearances, and long-term roles. She became Heather Pfister on Happy Days, shared scenes with Linda Pearl and Henry Winkler, and grew into one of the most recognizable child actors on television off-screen. She tried to remain a normal kid, attending Big Bear Elementary School, where she became president of her 5th-grade class. But even in those years, the pressure of fame was quietly reshaping her life. Hours on set, non-stop travel, and a family slowly growing dependent on the income of a little girl. Her rise was meteoric, but no one imagined that the same industry cheering her on was also pushing her toward an ending no child should ever face, the weight she hid behind the smile. As Heather's fame grew, so did the unspoken pressures surrounding her. To millions, she was the radiant child who delivered the unforgettable line, "They're here." But behind the scenes, the workload placed on her small shoulders was far heavier than the world realized. Hollywood in the 1980s was not equipped to protect child actors. Regulations were looser, schedules were harsher, and studios often prioritized deadlines over well-being. Heather, sweet, obedient, eager to please, fit perfectly into a system that rewarded silence and punished anything that slowed production. By the time she filmed Poltergeist 2 in 1985, Heather was working adult hours disguised as child-friendly days. The emotional scenes, the rehearsals, the hours of waiting on set, the constant pressure to be happy, polite, and professional, all of it took a toll. Her mother, Kathleen, did what she could, escorting her to sets, ensuring tutors were present, and trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. But the truth was unavoidable. The family depended on Heather's income. Her acting kept them financially stable after years of scraping by in a trailer park. If Heather rested, the household struggled. By 1986, subtle signs hinted that something was wrong. Heather's energy dipped. She occasionally complained of stomach pain and exhaustion, but rarely pushed back against the studio's demands. She loved acting, loved her fans, loved the thrill of bringing characters to life, but deep down, she was tired. When she contracted giardiasis from contaminated well water at Big Bear Lake, The resulting symptoms were dismissed as minor, and when her face swelled due to cortisone treatments mistakenly prescribed to treat what doctors believed was Crohn's disease, she quietly accepted it. She was told this was part of her job, something she had to push through. On set, colleagues sometimes noticed her growing pale between takes or asking for water more frequently, but she never complained loudly enough to stop production. A child who never wanted to disappoint anyone, Heather kept working, even as her body began signaling distress. No one fully understood. These were the early warnings. But Hollywood kept moving, the scripts kept coming, and Heather kept showing up, smiling for cameras that had no idea how much pain she hid behind her eyes. The illness no one saw coming. By late 1987, the signs could no longer be ignored. Heather had just wrapped filming Poltergeist III in June, but something about her didn't look right. Her cheeks appeared swollen, her energy faded faster than before, and she sometimes clutched her stomach as if trying to hide the pain. Doctors insisted she was dealing with Crohn's disease, a diagnosis that would soon prove devastatingly wrong. Still, they prescribed cortisone, a heavy medication for a child, and sent her home with assurances that she simply needed rest. Rest, however, was a luxury Hollywood never truly allowed its youngest workers. Her mother, Kathleen, watched with growing worry as Heather's symptoms intensified. There were moments when Heather, normally lively and talkative, retreated into herself, too tired to play or engage with friends. She missed school days, something she hated because being class president made her feel responsible for her peers. Yet even then, she pushed forward, determined not to let anyone down. To the outside world, she remained the cheerful star they adored. Inside the O'Rourke home, fear was slowly forming. January 31st, 1988, Super Bowl Sunday, was the breaking point. Heather spent the entire day vomiting every few hours, pale and exhausted. Her mother tried keeping her hydrated with Gatorade, hoping to stabilize her. By the next morning, Heather insisted she felt well enough to go to school. But when Kathleen made her breakfast, Heather suddenly choked on her toast and whispered that she couldn't swallow. Then her fingers and toes turned blue. Her breathing changed. Within minutes, Kathleen realized they were in a medical crisis far beyond the flu or Crohn's. As she rushed Heather toward the car, the little girl collapsed. Paramedics managed to revive her once, but her condition remained critical. She was taken first to El Cajon Community Hospital, then flown to the Children's Hospital of San Diego, where surgeons discovered the truth: a congenital intestinal blockage that had gone undetected her entire life. Infection had ruptured through her system, causing massive septic shock. Heather was rushed into emergency surgery, but her small body was losing the fight. At 2:43 p.m. on February 1st, 1988, just weeks after her 12th birthday, Heather O'Rourke was pronounced dead. Hollywood lost a rising star. A family lost a daughter, and the world lost a child. It never got the chance to fully know. The aftermath: blame, grief, and a mother who refused to stay silent. The shock of Heather O'Rourke's death spread through Hollywood with brutal speed. She was young, beloved, and had shown no signs of the catastrophic condition that ultimately took her life. The public struggled to accept the coroner's explanation. How could a child with access to the best doctors in California die from a congenital intestinal blockage that no one had ever detected? And why had she been misdiagnosed with Crohn's disease, an illness she never had? Kathleen O'Rourke, shattered but determined, refused to let her daughter's story end with unanswered questions. In May 1988, just 3 months after Heather's death, she filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Kaiser Foundation Hospital of San Diego and the Southern California Permanente Medical Group. Her claim was simple but heavy. Kaiser had failed her child. According to Kathleen, X-rays taken a year earlier should have revealed the narrowing in Heather's intestines, an abnormality present since birth. If they had properly read those films, she later said, my daughter would be alive today. The lawsuit ignited fierce debate. Kaiser defended their physicians, insisting their diagnosis and treatment were appropriate and that Heather's condition was unusually silent, but medical experts disagreed. Dr. Daniel Hollander, head of gastroenterology at UC Irvine, publicly remarked that Heather's death was distinctly unusual, adding that congenital stenosis typically produced digestive symptoms throughout childhood. His comments only fueled speculation that something had been missed, something that should never have been overlooked. Meanwhile, the Poltergeist 3 marketing team found themselves in an ethical nightmare. Heather's death occurred just 4 months before the film's June 1988 release. Studio executives hesitated to promote the movie, fearing accusations of exploiting her passing co-stars Tom Skerritt and Nancy Allen were discouraged from giving interviews to avoid questions about the tragedy. When the film eventually premiered, it carried a dedication to Heather, an attempt at respect that did little to ease the discomfort surrounding the project. Through all this, the O'Rourke household remained fractured by grief. Heather had been more than a child star. She had been the family's joy, their pride, and in many ways, their anchor. Losing her didn't just devastate them emotionally, it destroyed the future they thought they were building together. But while Hollywood retreated into silence, someone else, someone with his own history as a child star, finally stepped forward. Ron Howard finally speaks. And his words cut deep. For years, those who worked in the industry kept their distance from the controversy surrounding Heather O'Rourke's death. It was safer that way. Hollywood had always preferred silence over uncomfortable truths, but Ron Howard, a man who grew up in front of cameras long before he learned to direct them, eventually broke the silence. His comments, measured but unmistakably pointed, reopened wounds the industry hoped had already faded. Howard had worked with Heather during her recurring role as Heather Pfister on Happy Days, and he remembered her as bright, eager, and endlessly polite, qualities Hollywood often exploited in children. When asked about her passing decades later, he didn't hide behind the typical tragic loss lines. Instead, he spoke about the industry itself and what it had done to children like Heather. She was overworked, he said quietly. There were too many expectations placed on someone her age. I think about her a lot. Those 7 words, she was overworked, hit harder than any dramatic accusation. Howard didn't name names. He didn't point to a specific producer, director, or studio executive. But he didn't have to. For someone as careful and respected as Ron Howard, even a hint carried the weight of accusation. For Howard, this wasn't speculation. He had lived the life of a child actor. He had endured long hours, relentless scripts, producers who expected perfection, and an industry that moved too quickly for children to keep up. And he understood exactly how easily a young performer could be pushed beyond their limits simply because adults assumed their smiles meant they were fine. Howard's comments revived an uncomfortable question. Did Hollywood ignore the signs? Heather had been visibly ill during Poltergeist 3 filming. Her face was swollen from cortisone, her energy was dropping, her health was deteriorating in ways that would be obvious to anyone paying attention. Yet she kept working. Cameras kept rolling. Deadlines remained more important than a child's pain. Howard didn't accuse anyone of causing Heather's death, but he made something clear. Hollywood, driven by profit and momentum, had failed to protect her. And his words forced many to wonder whether her tragedy was simply the result of illness or the result of a system that treated a 12-year-old like a replaceable adult. A legacy haunted by questions that won't go away. Ron Howard's words did more than reopen old wounds. They forced fans and industry insiders to confront a truth many had quietly suspected for decades. Heather O'Rourke didn't just fall victim to a medical condition. She was also caught in a system that demanded more from her than any child should ever have to give. Even as her health deteriorated, she kept showing up, she kept performing. She kept carrying the weight of an entire franchise on her shoulders because no one around her expected her to say, "I can't." After her death, Hollywood tried to move on, but the public didn't. Fans mourned her like a family member they'd never met. Vigils were held, letters were sent, newspapers revisited her story, trying to understand how such a bright, healthy-looking child could vanish so suddenly. And when Poltergeist 3 was released 4 months later, dedicated to her memory, audiences watched it through a different lens. Every scene with Heather felt heavier, every smile tinged with tragedy. Over the years, conspiracy theories swirled. Some blamed the so-called poltergeist curse. Others claimed malpractice. Some believed the studio should have stepped in sooner. But beneath all the speculation lay one undeniable fact. Heather's death was preventable. A congenital intestinal stenosis doesn't appear overnight. Symptoms had been present. Doctors misread them. And a little girl paid the ultimate price. Kathleen O'Rourke fought for accountability through her lawsuit, eventually settling out of court. Tammy O'Rourke, Heather's sister, avoided the spotlight for years, only speaking through her own daughter decades later to confirm the medical truth behind Heather's death. And in 2024, the documentary Heather O'Rourke, She Was Here reignited interest in her life, gathering family members and co-stars Craig T. Nelson and JoBeth Williams to share memories of the child who left too soon. Today, Heather's story remains one of Hollywood's most painful reminders of how fragile child stardom can be. She was talented, disciplined, and loved by millions. But talent and love weren't enough to save her from a system that failed to listen when her body cried for help. In the end, Ron Howard's message stands as both a warning and a plea. If Hollywood cannot protect its youngest stars, then tragedies like Heather's will never truly stop. What do you think? Was Heather pushed too hard, or was her fate truly unavoidable? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into Hollywood's untold stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and click the bell so you never miss our next upload.